Welcome back to another Vue.js episode, and in this episode we are going to talk about composing with components. The chapter is called Composing in Components in the Getting Started guide, but what we're going to talk about is components. The first initial introduction to components. We did talk a bit about components in the last one, but now we're hopefully going to dive a bit more into it. So this is episode, number 5 of this series called Learning Vue.js the Hard Way. And if you haven't seen any of the other episodes, maybe check out the other episodes to get up to speed to this particular episode. And the reason it's called the hard way is that what we're doing is that we're reading the documentation page by page by page. And what I'm trying to do is sort of to use my voice as much as possible so that you can hopefully multitask. And the point is you don't have to sort of keep your eyes glued to the screen, but hopefully you can do something else at the same time and then still sort of learn Vue.js while doing something else. But let me know if that doesn't work out and if you think I should sort of approach this differently or explain more things as I'm going along. So I guess that's a bit of an experiment. Anyways, I guess let's just dive straight into it. We're now going to talk about components. So what are components? Generally, in the way I understand it is that most of the times when we talk about components in regards to web-related, or let's say Vue-related, I don't mean Vue as in V-U-E, I mean Vue as in V-I-E-W, right? Whenever you're talking about displaying things, right, in, for example, HTML. So whenever we're talking about rendering HTML or constructing HTML, components seem to always sort of be used to describe custom elements, let's say. Actually, let me flip these two. Let me just change places of those two windows so that we have... What happened now? I just lost the window that... Hang on. What am I doing wrong? Wait. Sorry, let me do this. Okay, never mind. Sorry, I've put up a window here so that I know when my face is in the way of things because I keep messing that up. Anyways, let's keep moving forward. Apologies for the interruption. Okay, so components generally seem to refer to the idea of defining a custom element. Think about elements in HTML, right? What are elements? Elements are things such as the A element, the P element, the div element, the title element, the whatnot, right? Like back in the days, the I element, right? Like span element, IMG element, right? And so forth and so forth. These are all elements, right? That are composed of sometimes of a single tag and sometimes of a pair of tags. So some of them are self-closing, some of them are sort of come in pair, like an opening tag and a closing tag. And a component is essentially then your own element that you've defined. It's like you're saying, well, I have this element that I call fruit, or that I call to-do item, or that I call to-do list, or that I call menu, or that I call image, let's say image, but maybe something like thumbnail, right? It's like I want all my thumbnails to sort of look like this, or a cover page, cover picture, right? Or like, I don't know. All of these different things. Like think about maybe you've looked at Google's material design. I'm not sure is that a thing anymore? I guess that's a thing anymore. Let's just material design. Google, right? Let's just quickly see. Because then that's kind of... Wait, what? Anyways, is material design Google? Am I just being confusing now? Design.google here, right? Anyways, okay, sorry, this is a sidetrack. What I mean is that if you think about designing things sort of as... Yeah, this is a sidetrack. This doesn't work out. Let me drop this. If you think about like these web pages where you have things that are displayed as sort of cards, actually, if you look at the picture here that we have in the Vue example, right? They're saying that, okay, you could think about components like this, like maybe your whole app, if you think about one screen of your app, like your whole screen, or like if it's a single page application, your whole app is a single component. That's the component that describes your app. Like that's your app component. And it's super specific in the sense that that's like, it's your app. Right? It's like it's non-reusable because it's your app. But that thing might be comprised of a number of subcomponents, such as, for example, your title, like or let's say your main navigation component, right? Like your top navigation component, or maybe you shouldn't say top navigation component, but like navigation component. Then maybe you have like a sidebar component or like an aside component, right? Like this thing that they show here on the right side. So like something that shows related stuff, and maybe that isn't even like you call it something like a related component. Maybe that's just something like a list component, or like a let's say, thumbnail gallery component, something that you design sort of more generally as that, like, this thing is a thing that can display pictures with links that link to sort of drill down pages where you can read more about that particular thing. So then maybe like your whole app is this composition of your main navigation, your main content component, or let me say with components, right? Your whole app component is the composition of your main menu component, your content component, and your gallery. Sorry, not gallery. Let's say thumbnail links or some. No, link. Yeah, gallery. Actually, link gallery. Let's say link gallery component, right? And then your main content component. That might maybe you have multiple different versions of that, right? So it's like maybe you have a sort of article component that can be rendered here, but you might also have maybe like, I don't know, article list component if this is a blog, right? It's like you can be on the list page or you can be in any particular article, right? And those two are exchangeable. But then at both times you would have sort of this related component, or I mean, I don't know. But hopefully this picture helps you a lot in if you haven't worked with components before, in order to try to understand this idea of components, right? It's like essentially boxes in boxes in boxes in boxes, like indefinitely. So the point is that you can think about these Russian dolls, right? Like the doll, actually that's a very bad analogy. Yeah, don't think about that. Think about this picture more, right? It's like probably Lego is a better example. I'm trying to think about a metaphor that is suitable. Never mind metaphors. I mean, the point is this. Anything that is describable is usually describable. I mean, it's the reductionist viewpoint, right? It's that anything can be described in terms of its constituent parts, right? Any bigger thing can be described in terms of its subcomponents, right? Every component can be described in terms of its subcomponent. But if every subcomponent is also a component, then that thing can be described in terms of its subcomponents. And then all of those subcomponents, because they are components, then they can be described in terms of their subcomponents, and so forth and so forth and so forth, and like in theory infinitely. And then you can do that division. You can exercise that division into, or let's say refinement, or like fractioning into subcomponents indefinitely, rather until you reach a point where you've satisfied yourself in terms of the level of abstraction that you think that you need for your particular application, right? It's like you keep breaking things down until you get to a point where you're like, this is a sufficiently small, like now all my components are sufficiently well isolated, or let's actually say, think about single responsibility principle, right? From, maybe that's more object-oriented programming, but I guess it sort of applies everywhere, right? Sorry, like everything should do, every module or component or class should do a single thing and a single thing only. So until you've reached the point where every component in your system feels like it's doing like a very, very specific thing, then until you've reached that point, you have great opportunities to, or you have the opportunity to further extract components or further extract subcomponents from your currently existing components. So hopefully that makes sense, right? It's like we're just saying everything can be divided into multiple parts. And if you think about it, like, okay, let's think about it metaphorically, right? It's like, this is a good example, right? It's like you think about the Earth, right? The Earth is divided up into continents, right? But then continents are divided up into countries, right? And then countries are divided up into, say, regions, right? And within regions, you have cities, let's say, right? But you can also go the other way around, and you can say, you can use multiple regions. Cities was a bad example. Let's stop with regions, right? You can use multiple regions to construct a country. And then you can use multiple countries to construct a continent. And then you can use multiple continents to construct the whole Earth, right? And that's the idea of components, right? And that's the idea of composition. It's like you're saying, let us define reuseful things that are isolated, right? Or let's say that are reusable and non-specific to the degree, are non-specific to the degree that they are, so that they are reusable. so you can use them in many different scenarios. And then instead of having to build like, think about it that way, right? When you're building your model of the Earth or whatever, it's not like you have to build everything like from the bottom up, from the sort of region level up to the Earth level from scratch every time. It's more like you're building a few components that are well thought out, and then you are composing them in a way that resembles the Earth. I understand that this metaphor is maybe a bit silly, but it's kind of also like you can think about it as object-oriented programming, right? It's like defining a bunch of classes that you reuse instead of defining everything from scratch. But okay, anyways, I think let's sort of drop this, right? So it's like, yeah, I mean, but then again, when talking about object orientation, I think it might be important to emphasize that this diagram here that they're showing, where they're saying that you're actually, I mean, these two images that they have, I just realized these actually probably intentionally perfectly match each other, right? It's like they have one top box here, which is the whole page. Then they have three sub boxes, so three subcomponents, which is this top thing, the main content thing, and the aside thing. And then the content thing has two sub boxes, which are these two dark gray boxes, this 1 and 2. And then this leftmost subcomponent of the root component has three subcomponents, which are these 1, 2, 3, right? So just as a way of reading this diagram, right? But what I wanted to emphasize is that these green boxes on the right-hand side, where they're showing hierarchy, they're showing this hierarchy to emphasize that the thing, the bigger thing, so the root, is built up of the composition of smaller things. And those smaller things, these on the second level, are built up by the composition of things on the on sort of one step lower, right, of even smaller things. And then you can keep going like that, which is different from the idea of inheritance from object-oriented programming, right? So it's not like we're saying the main page, or rather, the smallest things in the application are the bigger, like, are of the same type as the bigger. Like, it's not like we're saying like level 3 here, everything in level 3 is an instance of these things in level 2, and these things are instances of the main thing, right? That's not what we're saying. Like, that's a different idea. Here we're talking about composition. So this is really back to the idea of composition versus inheritance, or like to favor composition over inheritance. It's the idea is not that things are of the same type as the other thing. It's that the bigger thing is comprised of smaller things, right? Smaller things can be used to compose bigger things. Anyways, I'm sidetracking. And I guess, I wanted to say something else. Bigger things. Whew. Yeah, anyways. Yeah, so what I wanted to say is that you might, however, argue that these might follow a type hierarchy, and that they might all follow the same type because they're probably all, let's say, renderable or something like this. I mean, they're all components, right? So maybe you can think about this in terms of the, what is that called? Composite pattern in object-oriented programming, or something like that, right? I mean, you can find an analogy in functional programming as well. It's like maybe they are all functions that follow the same type. But anyway, so an inheritance hierarchy, I'm not saying that there is no inheritance hierarchy when building things using components. I'm just saying that the metaphor that we're trying to get to here is composition. We're trying to get to building bigger things from smaller things. But okay, now I need to be quiet. I'm talking too much. Okay, so let's talk about the documentation. What are they saying here? So they're saying the component system is important in Vue. The component system is an important concept in Vue because it's an abstraction that allows us to build large-scale applications, right? Self-contained, reusable components. And if we think about it, almost any type of application interface can be abstracted into a tree of components, right? Which is true, right? It's like there is no special case, let's say, right? Everything can be described in terms of an abstraction, and like every user interface can be described in terms of a set of composable components, right? It might be that your components, it might be that your interface is so esoteric that like no components in your description are reusable, right? But or used multiple times within your main component, let's say. But anyways, I mean, it can definitely be constructed into or deconstructed into components. I mean, I can't think of any reasonable reason why anything, like literally anything should not be decomposable into composable components if we're talking about user interfaces. But if you have a counterexample, please do shoot something in the comments, because that would be interesting to think about. But yeah, anything can be expressed in terms of components. Okay, so in Vue, a component is essentially a Vue instance. And we've talked about Vue instances, right? That's essentially all that we've been working for. And actually, working with, right? And actually, let me just open up here in the terminal. Let me just show you that we are in this folder that we've been working with before. So this is the code that we were sort of inheriting between all the different episodes. So it's like, I'm just picking up where we left off last time. So this, we have this index.html file and we have this main.js file. And let me just open up Vim and open up main.js to show that this is the stuff that we have in the in our sorry, this is what we have in the main.js file. But what I wanted to say is that this is a Vue instance, right? When we're saying new Vue here, then we are defining a new Vue instance. So the variable app here contains a Vue instance. So that's that, right? I mean, that's what they're referring to when they're saying Vue instance. So they're saying a component is essentially a Vue instance with predefined options, okay? So that means you don't necessarily have to use the component facilities. So I mean, if you look at the example here, they're saying Vue.component, and then they're building a component called to-do item. So we could assume that under the hood, what's happening here is that they're saying new Vue, and then they're passing some particular options, right? Think about what we're doing here. We're saying new Vue, and then we're passing some options here. So they're just saying that when you register a component, these options, there are some default options, right? So the options that they're passing here in the example when they're registering the component called to-do item, these are probably in addition to the options that are already predefined, and then when the viewer, like by the facilities that construct a component, right? So when you construct a component, you are essentially constructing a Vue instance, but where some let's say the options to the Vue instance are already defined. So it's like it's defaulting to some particular things. We don't know exactly yet. We don't know exactly what yet, right? But we'll probably see as we move along. So then they're saying, okay, but now you can compose it in another components template. And so let's jump over to our index.html file, right? And you can see here we have some basic HTML, right? And this is what we talked about before, where it's like we have the span element here, we have a div element here, we have a p element here, and so forth, right? But they're saying that, okay, if you define your own component, and this is like basically the same in tons of different let's say Vue-oriented HTML and JavaScript libraries, or JavaScript libraries for rendering HTML, then you can render that. Like you can into your HTML, you can put this thing, let's say to-do item. Let's actually use there, right? So you can render a to-do item here, right? And then I don't know, maybe we have some attributes here, right? It's like key equals value. Maybe we pass some attributes to it. And maybe we pass something inside here, right? Like maybe we pass some sub-elements in here. Inside like between the opening tag and the closing tag. And this we don't know yet, right? I would assume that both of these things are valid ways of interacting with a component, but we're gonna have to probably wait until later points before we can see that, or see how to do that. But let's just follow along and let's try to do their example, right? So let's say that we have this to-do item here. Let's actually, sorry, before I go any further, let me open up our page, because I've even forgotten what we've built at this point. So this is what we have here. Let me make this font a bit bigger. Yeah, so this is what we have, right? Where it's like we have hello Vue, and then we have some name here. Actually, let me maybe remove this name. Yeah, it's even a message here. Let's remove this message to simplify our page. And let's remove this to-do item so that it doesn't, because this should have given us syntax error, a syntax error. If I open up the console here, you can see, yeah, so actually that's a good thing, right? You can see that if you're trying to render a component, or you're trying to put an unknown element in your HTML, Vue will say unknown custom element to do item. Did you register the component correctly? I mean, no, we didn't, because we didn't even register it, but and then for recursive components, make sure to provide the name option. Cool, recursive components. We'll see. Hopefully that, I mean, obviously that should be in the docs as well. So we'll see what that is. But yeah, okay, so now we've removed that, so we shouldn't have that error. And let's jump to main.js and remove the message thing, right? Because we don't need message anymore. So we have, no, wait, sorry, message was hello Vue, not John Doe. But let's remove both of them, who cares, right? We're removing name, and we're left with fruit and fruits. Okay, let's save that. Let's go to index.html. Let's remove name here as well. Okay, so we only essentially have this list now, these fruits, and then you can add fruits, right? I think this still works, right? Pear. Yeah, okay, so that works, right? Okay, so all fine and dandy. Sorry, let me turn off, what is that, wrap? Set on, no wrap? Yeah, okay, sorry. All right, back to the documentation. So what they're saying is that, okay, you can construct a component like this. Maybe now it's time for me to switch places with these two things again. Okay, so let's assume, okay, so they're doing to-do items. We are doing fruits for some absurd reason. So maybe instead of having a fruit component, maybe I should think of this as a shopping cart or something like this, right? So let's say that it's a cart item. Yeah, let's think about that, right? Let's say that we have a cart item. So we are assuming that there's a component called cart item. And of course, if we just refresh that, we have the error that we talked about before, where it's going to say that cart item is an unknown element. Yeah, did you register it? No, we didn't, right? So let's figure out how to do that. So yeah, here we need to define the component. So let's go to main.js. And let's see, right? I do this as a separate thing. It's not like I'm passing it to the app here, because this apparently is a new Vue instance. So let's say Vue component. And I wonder if the order matters here. Let's try that as well. So let's say cart item. That's the name of the component. And then we need to pass some template. So this I find particularly interesting, right? Because it's like you pass this template in as a string, right? So I would immediately ask, I wonder if it's possible to, like without resorting to any other libraries, to put this template in a separate file. Maybe, maybe not, right? Maybe actually not if you think about it, because how would they be able, no, because then they would have to have some kind of loading system. But maybe that's when we get into like having the CLI and stuff like that, right? So if you remember from the first videos, we talked about how they recommend that you don't start with the CLI, like the command line interface, if you're just starting out with Vue. So maybe if we use that, maybe there's a way of getting this template out of the JavaScript, out of your JavaScript file, if you would want that, right? Like if you come from React, probably maybe you don't even want that, right? But it might make sense to define. I mean, then you could define a component as essentially like a triad of a HTML file, a JavaScript file, and a CSS file. And I think that would make sense, right? Like it would still be self-contained. It's just that you're separating those three things into three files. They're still self-contained because you're just seeing them as a triad of three files where like each individual file is meaningless without the other ones in some sense, which is not entirely true, but like I think you see what I'm saying. So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a bad thing. Of course, it would be not excellent if you would put all your HTML for all your components in one file, and then all your JS for all your components in one file. Like that's a different thing, right? I'm just saying like you could bundle them up into triads and then consider that triad a component. But anyways, let's drop that. So we have to define the template here. Whoops. We have to define the template here. And what is the template? Well, if it's a cart item, it should be a list item, right? So let's actually, let me go back to index here and show you. Let's try to replace, yeah, actually, look at this. We have the UL element here, and then within the UL, we have this li. So let's try to replace the fruits with the cart item, right? So I need to put this outside here, right? We should put the cart item here, and then that's going to replace this li stuff. So maybe, should I do an HTML comment just to hide this for now, right? So let's forget about that for now, and let's work with the cart item. So the cart item should render an li. So let's go back to main.js. So then we need to say that the template is some li with some text here, right? But we'll get to that in a moment, just as they are doing, like they're just hard coding some text first. So let's say hard coded cart item first, and then let's close the li, close the string, let's save that, and let's refresh the page. Wait, unknown custom element cart item. Okay, so maybe order matters. Let's think about this. If I put that first, and then we do it. Ooh, interesting. Okay, order matters, right? So when instantiating the app, when we are instantiating the app, we are not only instantiating the app, we are actually initiating the, let's say, mounting of the app inside the element that we've specified that the app should be mounted into. And I said app, but I should have said Vue instance, right? So there's this Vue instance that's being mounted into the element with an ID of app. And whenever we instantiate that, it's going to immediately start to mount it. And because it's then going to parse whatever is in that app element, which then contains this cart item component. It contains a reference to this cart item component. It contains an element which isn't native to HTML, but which is a component that we've defined ourselves. Because it contains that, then it cannot possibly mount our app into the ID app. It cannot possibly mount our instance, our Vue instance, or rather, it can't render what it needs to render. It can't parse the template and use the model data to put data inside that thing because it doesn't know about the concept cart item. So if we are in the main.js file, that means whenever we instantiate this Vue thing, right? Or rather, since we are pointing this Vue instance to the element app, and since that contains a custom element, then that custom element must exist in the namespace before we are essentially mounting into that element. I'm not sure if I'm expressing that strangely. I think hopefully you're seeing what I'm saying, right? It's like the element app contains a reference to a component, so hence that component must exist when we start to render something into that element, because otherwise how would it know? Or like when... Yeah, otherwise they would need some other trickery to sort of go back and forth. But yeah, so that makes sense, right? It's like we're saying, I mean, it's not strange if you think about it as dependencies, right? It's like, yeah, but the question is, I guess, who has the dependency? I mean, I'm a bit confused because it's like we're saying this, if we call this Vue instance the app, right? The app has a dependency on the component cart item. So app needs to import cart item. But then it's a bit funny because we have this dyad of this JS file and the HTML file. But if you think about it as one component, maybe that makes more sense, right? So it's like the app is this special case where possibly in the future they're going to show us how to use this template property of the options object that's being passed to a Vue instance to even specify the template of the outermost Vue instance. That would make more sense to me, right? So what I'm trying to say is that if now it's really not consistent, right? So it's like all of this stuff, let's say, all of the stuff that's in the div app, I'm just kind of feeling like that should be inside of a string that's called template here. Right, it's like template, and then we have this huge, whoops, yeah, that didn't work out the way I expected. And then we have this huge string, template. Let's see if I can, wait, index, undo, let's copy that, go back here, see if I can paste that. Yeah, but that's gonna look like total catastrophe. Let's actually just, let's just do this, right? Let me just quick and dirtily, try and put that inside of a string just to see if that works. If I save that and refresh the page, what happens? Error compiling. Component template should contain exactly one root element. Wait, hang on. Because it doesn't. Let's go back. We have UL. Yeah, it doesn't, right? So then... but yeah, we could trivially fix that. Let's just delete this stuff for now. And then let's actually delete this comment as well to say that it's just a UL containing this cart item. Let's save that. Let's refresh it. Yeah, so that actually works. So this is a total sidetrack, and we're gonna probably talk about this later on when we find that in the docs. But you can see that the template keyword can be used even for the outermost Vue instance, which kind of like actually makes perfect sense if you think about it, because they're saying that components essentially are a special case of Vue instances. They are components with, they are Vue instances with some predefined options. So that would make a ton of more sense, right? Because this now feels like a self-contained thing. So this app thing is a self-contained Vue, let's say class actually. It's an instance of a Vue. It's a Vue instance that's being passed some specific object configuration, and that instance has a dependency on the component cart item, right? And now that makes sense, right? Because then it's like, well, you can't, of course, render this component if it has a dependency on cart item if the cart item is defined after it. So if I put that down here and then save and then refresh, then we have unknown custom element cart item. But if I put it up here and save it and refresh, then it's fine, right? Because then we can actually render that. Sorry, I think maybe the cats are trying to get in. Hang on. Sorry, it's difficult to tell. Okay, but let's drop this, right? Let me undo backwards from here. So I'll remove the template from this Vue or from the configuration object that's being passed to our main Vue instance, and save that, and then go back to index.html and undo back here so that we have the template specified here in the app that we're sort of rendering into. And then let's just refresh, right? This should still work, right? This works, and now of course we have this capacity to add things again. Or I mean, we have these parts rendered, like the input field and the button, because those I removed before when we had this issue of the template only needing, or the requirement that the template only have a single root element. Actually, that was very interesting because we don't have that requirement here, which is strange in my mind, but yeah, that's probably because of the L direct. Yeah, I don't actually know. Let's see what happens when we move forward, right? Because it's strange because we did have the L directive before as well. So I was thinking maybe the L directive was the, oh sorry, I said directive, but I meant property. Maybe the L property of the configuration object was the sort of single entry point, but actually it's not, right? Because we had that before as well. But anyways, let's drop this. Okay, let's go back to components. We're rendering this cart item, and you can see that works because we get this hard-coded cart item. But actually, of course, this adding doesn't work now, right? Because this list is no longer dynamic. It's no longer displaying fruits. However, I mean, the adding probably works into memory still. So let's think about it. What we were displaying before is fruits. So we should be able to say app.fruits here in the console, yeah, and then you can see I now have 22 fruits because I pressed the button a ton of times. But sorry, let's go back to the docs here and let's keep going. Let's see what the next step is. Okay, but and then they're saying, okay, yeah, but this would render the same text every time, which is not very interesting. We want to have this dynamic, blah 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 blah. So we need to use this thing called props. So let's go back to main.js. And then look at when we are registering this component. So then they're saying, okay, you need to specify that you also want to make use of props. Props is, of course, short for properties. So props is an array where we specify the different props that we want to have. And they are saying that their component is a to-do item component, and the prop that they're passing is a to-do, which makes sense, right? So for us, that I guess would mean that we should pass something like not a cart, a cart item. Yeah, and I don't want to say item, so maybe let's say we pass a cart item. Maybe this would be a name conflict, right? Let's see. I don't know. I don't actually know, right? Let's just save that and run and see if we get an error. No, we don't get an error, so maybe that's fine. Let's see, right? I mean, you can see my confusion in that we call this cart item, and we call the name of the component is cart item, and the prop is cart item. Yeah, okay, actually, never mind. Maybe that's local. Maybe the name is local. I'm not sure. So let's just call it item for now, because it's probably not polluting the global namespace, right? Because the component is probably polluting as we're building it now, the global namespace, but I'm pretty sure item does not, because the prop probably maps directly to an attribute. So it just enables an attribute on the custom element that we've defined. So this should mean that we can, yeah, as they say here, that we can vbind, right? So let's go back to index.html, and that should mean that we can vbind the property, what do we call it, item, right? So let's just put some text here, right? So let's say dynamic text, right? And this is, of course, the prop part, right? So the prop is the item. And of course, again, like prop is property, short for property, but it's essentially, I mean, it's an attribute, right? It's like we're saying there's a property of a cart item. Every cart item has a property which, or may have a property which is called item, may have an attribute called item, and there you may pass in a value. So, no, wait, when we're v-binding, sorry, then we need a model thing. If I just pass a string, I should probably just say item like this. Let's try this out. This should work, actually, I'm thinking. So let's then say, instead of rendering a hard-coded text, we render the item, I guess. Let's save that and try this out and see if this works. I'm not misunderstanding, right? So you can see we get dynamic text here. I mean, it's not dynamic text, but the text is saying dynamic text. So we can pass that in. Now the question is, can we pass something from the model? And of course we can. Hang on for one moment. Sorry, okay. And of course we can, right? But let's actually try that out. So let's go into, so we have the fruit property, for example, which is this property here. So let's try and pass that in. So if we go back to index.html, and again, we were using vbind, but now we were changing back to sort of hard coding this property item. But if we instead, or attribute item, or prop item, right? But if we instead say vbind item, then this would be a variable, and that's available in our model, in our data model, then let's say that's fruit. And if we save that and update the HTML page, you can actually see this successfully worked. We have orange. The question is this updating, right? If I remove the E here, yeah, you can see that works, right? Many oranges, okay? Then that works, right? It's bound. So whenever we update this text, we're also updating here. Of course, this add button still doesn't work because this is sort of not the thing we're actually intending to do. So what we are actually intending to do is very similar to what they're doing here. We're intending to do what we were doing here before as well. So we want to for over the fruit in fruits. We want to for over all of the different fruits, and then we want to display one cart item per fruit, which again we do by saying, so I'm just the fact that I'm breaking lines here doesn't matter at all. I'm just doing that to make it less, or visually more sensible. So what we want to do is we want to say v4, and as we talked about before, right, if you think about it, v4 is an attribute that you place on, a directive that you specify on the thing that you want to repeat. So it's not like we're wrapping cart items in a for, right? It's not like we're saying for every item or for every fruit in fruits and then cart item. It's the other way around. It's that we're saying cart item for every fruit in fruits, right? So for fruit in fruits, close that, and then we vbind item to let's maybe still say fruit, yeah? To simplify, let's still say fruit. Let me put that on a new line. Okay, and I'm going to show you why, right? Because if we refresh now, I think this should work, because what I'm expecting is that we get many orange, or sorry, not many oranges, the original text, which was orange, once per item that we've hard-coded into the cart, let's say. If I refresh, yes, that's what happens, right? But of course, I forgot that those are JSON objects, so maybe I should then say that in the cart item, so if I go to main.js, maybe it should be item.text, I think was the, no, sorry, name. I can actually see the keys here, right? So if we specify name, and then we refresh this, you can see we get, we actually get apple, pear, banana. Wait a minute, I was expecting to get the hard-coded text. Why did I not? Sorry, because I'm using the same variable 2 times. So if I said f here, for example, for every, for every f in fruits, and then we vbind, and then we still vbind fruit, and then we refresh, then I thought we were going to have the hard-coded text. We don't have access to fruit. which is available in the model. I was expecting that we get access to this just like we had before. So it seems like when we make use of for, we lose the context. How interesting, right? Why can't I bind to fruit? No. Sorry, we can. Sorry, it's my bad. We can bind to fruit. It's just that I've specified name here. So item is now a string, not an object with a name, right? And then we get orange, orange, orange. And if I change this, we're changing it like in all places at once, right? So we're just using the fruits array to specify the iteration, but we are not using the item in every iteration, this f that we called it now, to bind to the prop item so that it would be available locally within every lap or step of the iteration. So this is back to the idea that we talked about before, where as opposed to some other libraries, like for example mustache, the .js, the context remains the same. So even if we are saying for fruit and fruits, we still have the sort of root as our namespace, right? It's not like we're diving into every fruit and sort of have to go backwards up the hierarchy in order to access values outside. We're still at the same level in the data object, in the data model, I should say. Hopefully that makes sense. Or I think that was a bit confusingly explained by me. But of course, what we actually want to do is that we want to say for every fruit in fruits. And I could have called this f and then pass f here, and then go back to main.js, and instead of saying just display item, we could say display item.text, which is because it has the property text, and then refresh, and then that didn't actually work. What did I mess up? No. So yeah, it was not called text. It was called name. Right, name. So this is very tricky. I'm just realizing that I'm probably going to mess this up a lot of times. So I guess this is why you would want to have static typing, for example. So that's a bit tricky. Maybe I should look into Elm. Like maybe we should do a similar kind of thing with Elm. Let me know in the comments if you think that would be interesting, like the Hardway series on Elm. Anyways, so now you can see if I refresh, we get apple, pear, and banana. Let me close the console there. And that is because we've specified that we have a prop for the component cart item, and the prop is called item, and it's in a list, so it could be followed by a bunch of other props, and this prop could be called anything. And then we are saying that the template is a list item where it's rendering item.name within that list item. And if we then go back to index.html, you can see that we are saying that render a cart item, but do v4. So we're saying for every f, let me rename this now to fruit, for every fruit in fruits, v-bind the item prop to whatever is found in the data model under that, or I mean, rather, I should say, for every fruit in fruits, where fruits is taken from the data model, we're looking at the key fruits, then we specify a local variable called fruit, and then we're v-binding the prop item to that particular fruit. So that particular fruit is in some sense passed down into the component, right? And this is how you can probably see how you can build bigger things using these smaller things, where the bigger things are passing data down into the smaller things, right? And then you're using these different small things in order to build bigger things. So if you have an image, you might v-bind the source, for example, like the URL to that image. Or you might bind the, let's say, I don't know, like the border thickness maybe doesn't make any sense because it's like, that's more stylistic. But like if it's an image, like with the, like you might bind the caption, the image, and the title or something like this, right? Like attribution or anything like this, right? So I mean, it's only the fantasy is what limits this. I mean, you see what I'm saying. So you can bind anything that you want. And let me now remove this comment that we had before. But before I do that, let's just emphasize that what we were rendering before is that we were rendering amount and we were rendering name. So we were saying like 1 pieces of apple or whatever. So let's remove that and let's try to get to that point as well. But in order to do that, we need to, of course, v-bind something else. We can't just v-bind, or sorry, I was going to say that we need to v-bind, let's say, amount and, oops. And this is, of course, one way we could do it. We could probably say bind amount to fruit.amount, and vbind name to fruit. I'm not sure. Maybe name is a reserved keyword. We'll see. And to fruit.name. This we could do. Let's actually do that before we go any further, right? So now we have two props. We have the prop item and we have the prop name. Oh, sorry, we don't have item. We have amount and we have name. I assume this works, right? Let's see. So then we're printing amount first, and then we're saying pieces of, and then we are printing name. So let's save that and see if it works. That works. 2 pieces of apple, right? And then now we should actually be able to add stuff. Actually, the rendering that we did before this, like before I started to change the code now, I think we should be able to change stuff there as well, right? But we can still be able to add stuff. Or I mean add stuff, right? So orange, right? Pear. I can add it, right? It works. So maybe this brings up an interesting point, which is, should you pass things as two props, or should you pass them as one, right? This is totally a design decision, right? So I think we should think about this as in terms of coupling, right? And in terms of, what is that called? Data clumps. If I'm passing an amount and a name, so a data clump is when multiple pieces of data often appear together, right? That's one way of thinking about a data clump. Or where you pass around 2 things, but one of the things don't really make sense without the context of the other thing. And actually, that's a very good example here, right? So does an amount really make sense without what it's specifying, right? Probably not. If you just say 1, it's like, well, 1 could be like absolutely anything. It's like, I don't know, like, are we talking about like 1 page? Are we talking about like 1 login attempt? Are we talking about like 1 thing added? Are we talking about 1 item in total in the shopping cart? Like, it could be absolutely anything, right? So in order to put 1 into context, it should probably be paired up with another thing, which is the thing that it's like, it's one of. And when you have those 2 pieces together and you're passing around those 2 things together, then that suggests that actually, if one of them doesn't make sense without the other, then we're actually talking about a single thing. So that should be turned into its own concept, like its own model, its own class if you're in object-oriented programming, or its own type, right? Generally, its own type, right? So in algebraic data types, it's a product type, and in object-oriented programming, it's a class, for example, or like a struct or whatever, or tuple or whatever. Anyway, it's some kind of name type, right? Hopefully. So instead of taking this 2 props here, the amount and the name, we should go back to taking only an item, right? And instead of then displaying amount directly here, we say item.amount, because that's how we make sense of the amount. It comes from an item, and then we have item.name, right? This is, of course, if I just refresh this now, this doesn't work, right? Because we don't even have that prop. Actually, maybe we get an error here. Let's think about that. That would be interesting. I don't think we will, right? No, we do. That's very cool, right? So it's saying, okay, cannot read property amount. Okay, so item is undefined. That's one good error. Amount is undefined. Isn't this exactly the same? Type error. Yeah, okay, maybe one is JavaScript. One is JavaScript, one is a view warning. Type error, yeah, this is a view warning. Amount of undefined. Wow, those are a lot of the same errors, sort of. Well, let me put this on this page so we can all read it together. Amount of undefined. Did I only get errors for amount rather than name? Really? Amount. That is so odd. But maybe it sort of like crashed and it stopped rendering or something like that. I don't know, man. I don't know. Let's drop that. Yep. But anyways, you can see that you do get some errors. And how do we fix these errors? Well, of course, we have to go back to the HTML, and now we can't vbind amount and name separately. Instead, what we're doing is that we're binding an item to a fruit, essentially. We're binding the whole fruit instead. And we're passing in the whole fruit, which is the whole object with 2 properties. And now you can see it works again, right? And we can keep adding, and we're rendering both the pieces and the apple. Interestingly, let's try this out, because my understanding is that when you are passing, when you're binding to something, you don't necessarily have to bind to a model property, I think you can sort of write an expression here as well. So I'm suspecting that maybe we should also be able to do this. Like we should be able to say amount colon, let's say 1, and then name colon hard coded, let's say, and then let's close that. I have no idea whether this works. Let's just try and see. Yeah, that works, right? So 1 pieces of hard coded, right, for all of them. But then, of course, then this 1 here could be oof. But how do I do that? Then I have to specify the variable. No, sorry. This is of course JavaScript, right? So I specify fruit dot amount, and here I specify fruit dot name. Let me try to make this a bit so we can fit. Yeah, we can't, but whatever. So like that, right? I need to close this. Okay, let's see if that works. Yeah, that actually works. So 2 pieces of apple, 10 pieces of pear, and so forth. And then we can keep adding. So the reason I'm emphasizing this is that now we are taking something, we're taking a concept which exists in the level of the app, which is the fruit. And then we're passing that data type, or we're passing an instance of that data type downwards into a subcomponent. And that subcomponent makes an assumption on the structure of that thing that it's being passed. And because we're not in a type-safe environment, right? I mean, we are in a dynamically typed language and a framework which doesn't enforce any form of typing, or maybe some forms of typing, I don't know. But so we need to be very careful about making sure that we get the names right, and especially since we don't get errors sometimes when we're accessing properties that don't exist. Like when we get null, we simply get an empty string, as we've seen when I said that, oh, I'm going to hit this error tons of times. So so this is just an example of how you can hack up on the fly let's say what am I saying? Like we're decoupling the idea of the fruit on the app level from the idea of the fruit on the cart item level, right? Because we're saying these are 2 different things that could potentially follow different interfaces. So if I would now change the structure of the fruit here in the app level, like let's say this was a mint, right? And then the name was I don't know, title or whatever, then the lower level would not break because we're sort of binding the amount, we're binding the amount property in the lower level to the amount property in this level, and then we're binding the name attribute to the, or property to the title property at this level. Of course, this is probably not the way maybe you would want to do it, right? I'm assuming that there would be a natural location in which we would do this if you would want to do this. But then again, like also maybe I'm just realizing maybe this is a completely unnecessary thing to do. You should rather, maybe we should rather think about it like this. Probably no. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm just being confusing. What we should say is that it's great that we can do this even on the fly, because I can begin with the assumption that these 2 data types, sorry, I'm spitting on the microphone. We can begin with the assumption that these 2 data types are the same. I'm just passing the fruit down. But if I happen to want to change later down the road the fruit up here, then I can do that without also having to change things down in the cart item, which is a great thing, right? You can also think about it. Maybe the concept, like the data type fruit wants to grow and encompass more things, but the cart item really should not be concerned with those other things. It should only be concerned with these 2 properties, and hence it should not be passed the complex object. I mean, for whatever, like let's think about it for like reasons of simplicity or whatever, then you have a way of rebinding keys to values. But of course, again, like you can do this here in the let's say the directive level, or like in the expression that's being passed to the directive. But I'm assuming that you probably shouldn't. Right? I'm assuming that probably there's a better way to put this, which is probably like somewhere in the component, or like yeah, I'm not sure yet, right? There should definitely be a better place to put this. So this is maybe like like an adapter or something. It's really like an adapter, right? It's like it's converting from one interface to another interface. It's sort of just taking data that's formatted in one way and turning it into the same data formatted in a different way. So that's really like an adapter, right? But for data rather than for a class with functions or a class with methods. Anyways, I think probably let's wrap this up. Let's see if we have anything more. So they just showed their example here. They also have this ID property that they say that they're going to use later. I was initially assuming that you need to have an ID property when rendering, and that this might have something to do with they needing a unique ID in order to keep track of, I don't know, like which has been updated or something like that. Let's just quickly try out to see if we do need it. So let me change, let's do fruits index 2 and change the name to hello, let's say hello all caps world. And let's do that after 2000 milliseconds. Let's save that and let's see if I run this page, add an orange. It's been 2 milliseconds, has it not? Did I? Oh, sorry. Of course, I can't say just fruits. I need to say, oops, sorry, I opened the console. Oh, we actually had that error as well. So I need to say app.fruits, right? Because that's our variable. So after 2000 milliseconds, yeah, that thing is changed to hello world. Then let's think about it. That was 2, so that's index 0, 1, 2, right? And even if I add something, that should still work, and I can add something after. Yeah, so, I mean, it seems like the reactivity is working. So I would assume, let me just remove this set timeout. So I would assume that this index stuff or this ID stuff is something that they want to use later on, maybe for identifying which to-do is completed when you press something. But correct me if I'm wrong, but I think even like in Redux or maybe React, you actually need unique items. Maybe that was Ember. Anyways, some frameworks you need a unique ID when iterating over and displaying multiple elements dynamically. Anyways, okay, and then they're saying this is a contrived example, but they have managed to separate it into multiple different pieces. I would actually say this is not a contrived example. I would say if you have something like this, then of course break it up, right? Like the general rule in my mind is always, if you have something which is susceptible to further, I'm struggling to find the word, but like decomposition, right? If it's possible to decompose something, if it's trivially possible to decompose something into parts, decompose it to parts or into parts. That's a general rule, right? If you have a class that you can, like if you think about object-oriented programming, that you can trivially figure out how to decompose into multiple classes, do it. Then it's the right choice, right? If it's not trivial, then of course you need to be more careful, because then we're in the territory of, let's say, Sandy Metz's statement that the duplication is far cheaper than the wrong abstraction, right? Because like going through all these hoops and figuring out an abstraction that might prove to be very, very wrong down the road is, of course, a very expensive mistake. But if it's trivial to extract things, such as in this case, or if it's trivial to extract reusable components, such as we've done now and such as they did, of course, do it, right? And of course, then they're saying here, yeah, we'll see a lot more about components later in the guide. That's cool. And then they're saying, here's a example of what an app might look like, right? And this is actually very similar to what we looked at in the beginning here when we had these hierarchies, right? So it's like they have an outer div, which is the app, and then they have an app nav element, a component, and then they have another component, which is app view. And inside of app view, they have the app sidebar and the app content. And here you can see, right? We were making the assumption in the beginning that we are probably able to specify attributes on elements and children to elements. And here you can see clearly we can, right? So you can pass that into components, and we'll see how that works probably again later in this series, because we need to figure out like where are those things rendered. Wait, actually, let me think about that. Yeah, that is of course trivially obvious, right? It's like, no, because like, what's the relationship between the template and children of instances of the component? So maybe you need like an outlet. I think Ember works with this sort of outlet concept where, I mean, it's a very long time since I looked at Ember, but like where the HTML that you nest is dumped into. But let's see. Let's wait and we'll see what happens when you put HTML inside a component, like between the opening and the closing tag. And this, I mean, I really need to wrap up now, and I want to close components before we get to the next one. But let me just say something here, right? They're just saying that so that you may have noticed that that Vue components are very similar to custom elements, right? Which is a part of the web component spec. So let's just jump over to that, right? I guess this is like a standards discussion. Maybe it's a proposal, or maybe it's, yeah, I mean, I hardly know anything about these things. Yeah, let's not, yeah. Maybe that is standardized, maybe that's not standardized. No, here, okay, web components has been finalized, but it's not natively implemented in every browser. Okay, and you need shims, I guess, for that to work. Yeah, but, or polyfills, sorry. But Vue, however, does not require polyfills and work consistently in all browsers, i.e. so Internet Explorer 9 and upwards, right? So they're scrapping support for IE8 and below, which, I mean, who cares? And Vue provide important features that are not available in plain custom elements, most notably cross-component data flow. I'm just reading now from the page, right? Custom event communication and build tool integrations. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't know. That could probably have been built on top of the web component spec, but who knows? But yeah, maybe you could view Vue as something that's being built on web component spec. So essentially they're saying like there's a proposal, or there's an accepted spec that probably will work and possibly be heavily used in the future, and that will be sort of native to HTML and JavaScript, but currently it's not implemented in every browser, which means that you need polyfills, and instead of then relying on the sort of updating of that standard, and if you want additional features such as this cross-component data flow and custom event communication, then you might use Vue instead of using web components. I don't know enough about web components to have an honest, like, sensible opinion about that. But if you have some opinions about that, please do share something in the comments. That would be interesting to hear. So, but yeah, and let's just think about it. What do they mean with cross-component data flow and custom event communication? I'm wondering if they actually mean sideways, right? It's like, because what we looked at now is like passing data downwards into components, right? Passing data from your context down into a component who then has the capacity to pass that data onwards down into the next component. But when they say cross-component, I'm wondering if they are saying like between components on the same level. That kind of frightens me if that's the point, because I'm not sure if that's a very sought after thing, right? Maybe that's not really something we want to have, but maybe they're referring to the observer stuff. I don't know. And custom event communication, then, yeah, I don't know. Let's drop this. I'm not entirely sure what they mean. Maybe they mean the observer stuff. Yeah, possibly. I don't know. Sorry for not knowing. And yeah, then they're just saying thanks a ton, and let's jump into the next slide. And let me just click this next link so that we end up on the next page, which is the Vue instance. And this is the stuff that we are going to talk about next time. If you survived up to this point in the video, kudos. Awesome. Let me know what you think about this series. Remember to subscribe so that you won't miss the next video. Thanks a ton for watching, and I will see you in the next Vue video, or maybe in another video. Thanks for watching.